Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay, a few technical issues. Mr. Tyler, would you like to?
Yes. Thanks, Chairman. I will just briefly run through some introductory parts of the meeting before we get into the agenda. Please can I ask all members, officers and members of the public to switch mobile phones off or to silent for the duration of the meeting. Also, please be aware that this meeting is being audio recorded and will be used for subsequent broadcast on the council website. It can be audio recorded or filmed by any members of the public. We would just ask, obviously, please be respectful of any member of the public's wishes not to be captured in the film. The chairman does have the ultimate discretion over any audio or filming and can stop the meeting if he feels that it's being prejudiced by any such action. We aren't expecting any fire alarms to sound today, so if a fire alarm bell does ring continuously, then I would say please can you make your way outside the main doors and we can meet in the car park assembly point. Thank you very much. And if I may just remind everyone here who is speaking, be that members, officers or members of the public, please just make sure your microphone is turned on because otherwise it won't be captured by the audio recording. Thank you very much. So with that we move to item 1 of the agenda, which is apologies. We have received apologies from councillors Malcolm Davies, Beverley Dunlop and Paul Hilliard. Item 2, substitute members. We have received notification from the relevant political group nominee that Councillor May Haynes will be substituting today for Councillor Beverley Dunlop. Item 3, declarations of interest. Members, do you have any declarations of interest on the items before you? Councillor Trent.
Yes. Yeah, I need to seek advice on it actually because it's I don't know whether it's a close one or a distant one, but I'm a trustee of an organisation which will ultimately benefit from a building project delivered by through a partner organisation by a third party that will benefit from a substantial grant from the Talbot Village Trust. So I don't know whether that is prejudicial because, as I say, the ultimate beneficiaries will include the group that I'm a trustee of.
We're just going to take a couple of minutes to consider that.
Yeah, apologies for not raising it earlier, but it was literally one of those things that suddenly cropped up and I said, oh dear, that could be an issue.
Councillor Miller, did you?
I wasn't going to raise it, but thank you for Tony, who has done. I'm a governor of a school who has been awarded a grant from the Talbot Village Trust at the moment as well. If it's relevant for Tony, it'd be relevant for me. Yeah.
Councillor McCormack?
A charity to which I'm a trustee of has also applied to the Talbot Village Trust, but we haven't actually been awarded any money yet, so I would probably be in the same situation.
Councillor Trent, could you join us? We'll just clarify what you the exact position. Thank you, everyone. So, following that disclosure, I understand, Councillor Trent, that you will be withdrawing from that item, and Councillor McCormack, the same.
Yes.
And Councillor Miller, that was just purely for transparency, or thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Item 4 is confirmation of minutes. I have provided the Chair with a copy of the minutes from the previous meeting on the 3rd of October, and with members' agreement, the Chair will proceed to sign them as a correct record. Thank you very much. Item 5, public issues. Chair, we have received several requests to speak on the applications before members today. We will hear them as and when the relevant application is being heard, as long as all members are happy and content for that to take place. Thank you. That moves us on to item 6, which is the schedule of planning applications. Thank you, Chair. Yes, just been prompted to remind members and everyone in the room that 6 St George's Avenue, the planning application for that address, was withdrawn before the meeting today, so that will not be heard by the committee today. Thank you.
So the first item on the agenda this afternoon, first application, is for the former Winter Gardens site, and Mr. Raven will be leading on that.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application site includes the former site of the Winter Gardens Concert Hall in Bournemouth, the artist car park to the rear, the Keystone building, including several restaurants, the former Winter Gardens booking office, and the public car park behind the Keystone site. The former concert hall has been demolished, and that part of the site has been in use as a temporary car park for some time now, as you can see from the overhead on the screen. Just going through a few slides just to familiarise members with the site. Got a variety of aerial views looking down towards the site, as you can do. It's demarked with the large car park in the centre, so looking towards the Hilton and the site behind it. And this is from the east. This is looking from the bottom of the Hilton towards the site, and you see Keystone House on the left and Valentina's restaurant in the foreground. It's again looking up towards the existing access and the car park. So looking down towards Keystone House. It shows Cranbourne Road on the left-hand side and the site right in front of you. It's again looking up Cranbourne Road with the site on the left. This is from the interior of the site with the Cranbourne Road boundary on the right-hand side. This is the car park and the site of the former concert hall. And other photographs just showing the level of tree coverage on the perimeter of the site. This is what will be the access to the residential area. You can see Cranbourne Road through the trees. And this is the proposed landscaping master plan. Members will note that the Planning Board of the former Bournemouth Borough Council resolved to grant outline permission for the redevelopment of this site back in October 2018. Under that application, the matters considered and approved were the scale, the access, the layout and the appearance of the development, with only landscaping reserved for subsequent consideration. So this application before you today is only seeking confirmation of the proposed landscaping scheme. It should be noted that all matters that have previously been considered cannot be reconsidered under this application. Now onto the outline application. The level of information provided was essentially that which would have been expected for a full application. It gave members a good understanding of what was being proposed, although on an indicative basis. It should be noted that no additional trees are shown to be removed under this application. The tree removal and retention plans for both the outline application and this current application are the same. The areas specified as landscaped areas, planting, play park, piazza, public footpath, hard landscaping, water features, etc. are the same on both applications and are considered to be appropriate. It should be noted that the layout of the site was approved under the outline application. What was a notable difference on the plans originally submitted as part of the application was the omission of the green roofs on a number of the flat roof elements of the scheme, together with some alterations to the proposed play park. Now, the loss of the green roofs was not considered positive, particularly as the council had declared a climate emergency. The purpose of the green roofs is not primarily aesthetic. They actually reduce surface water runoff, they conserve energy, they reduce pollution, reduce the carbon footprint, and provide habitat for wildlife. So following negotiations with officers, it's good to see that these have been reinstated to the scheme in front of you. With regard to the play area, the size of the area remains as previously shown, and although the indicative layout and features have changed since the outline application, the specific details will not be able to be agreed until further into the actual development phase. This is an element that the council's parks team will need to be involved with, particularly if it will come back into council control to be managed and inspected. And a suitable condition is proposed to ensure that this is and deliver it appropriately. Your tree officer has not raised any objections to the principle of the landscaping scheme, which includes all planting, replacement tree provision, green roofs, climbing plants and balcony planting. But as with all developments, and given the phasing and scale of this development, the specific details would not be agreed until after works commence and the planting schedule and timetable has been agreed. And again, suitable conditions ensure the appropriate delivery. Your urban design officer initially raised some concerns relating to some of the detail of the proposed hard landscaping, and these have been taken on board by the applicants and reflected in amended plans. These largely entailed the position of seating areas, the design and finish of the waste bins, and street lighting. A value of public art has been provided by the developer, and this has been negotiated and agreed with and will form part of the overall landscaping scheme, and this will be secured by a relevant condition. As with all developments, soft and hard landscaping elements are normally the last part of the development to be completed. The details sometimes need to be altered during the different phases of the process, and the proposed conditions allow this flexible approach when considering and agreeing the specific elements. And notwithstanding this, the principle of the landscaping scheme is now very similar to the previous indicative scheme. There's a huge potential for the public areas to be very well used, very welcoming and a high quality asset to the BCP area. Your officers therefore recommend the application is granted subject to conditions attached to the report in front of you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Raven. So, members, we are just looking purely, as Mr. Raven said, at the landscaping, not the full application that was granted by Bournemouth Borough Council previously. Any members wish to comment? Councillor Bartlett?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions for clarification, please. The Piazza, the para 23, it says the layout allows for...
Sorry, Councillor Bartlett, my fault entirely. We do have a representation here. We do have Mr. Lamb from Savills. My fault entirely. Mr. Lamb, would you like to come forward? So welcome, you have 5 minutes to...
Okay, fine.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members. Thank you, Mr. Raven. I thought it was a very accurate description of the kind of summing up of the proposals. I don't intend to take the full 5 minutes, so you can continue your discussion. Really just to say that the plans for you today are a product of 5 months of engagement with the Council in terms of putting the application in and talking during that determination period. That's involved conversation with urban design and tree officers. It does very closely follow the illustrative plan, which was approved with the outline application back in November 2018. And we're delighted that the authority has been able to recommend this for approval. I think the only reason we're here today in front of you is because under the new constitution, all major sites that are council-owned land have to go to planning board. Otherwise, it could have been an officer's delegated decision. Mr. Ravens mentioned about some of the objections in relation to trees. We are not changing anything that was agreed in the outline stage. There are more trees being planted and detailed as part of this landscape scheme, and that's going to bring amenity benefits and also biodiversity gains. And it's been summed up by the planning officer that there'll be no adverse impacts on the amenity of the residents on Cranbourne Road who have made a number of those comments. I'd just like to spend 1 or 2 minutes just talking about some of the individual aspects. I think that's important just to give a bit of clarity on that. In terms of the play areas, the principle and the kind of location of the play area was agreed at the outline stage, and we've got clustered of equipped play in a highly visible area that is tailored to safely accommodate children, mainly under 12 years old. The final equipment and the themes will be designed in coordination with the equipment provider, and that's why it's appropriate for that to be dealt with as a condition. Older age groups, active play typologies require a greater amount of space and standoff distances for safety, and we can't provide it in the site. These active typologies will be, are well catered for on the beachfront, including rock climbing on the pier, within the central gardens, and the Bournemouth Tennis Centre a short walk away. We've also got private courtyards which offer space for the resident children of all ages for informal play and recreation. And in the round, we feel this is an appropriate response given the site location, the mix of development proposed, and the intended function. The Piazza is a key public space within the town centre, and I think it's something to be celebrated as part of this scheme. And it's going to connect the development to other public spaces and form an important link with the Grand Garden Walk, which I know is a long-held vision, particularly for the Bournemouth Borough Council, part of the new unitary authority. It's intended to be a flexible space to serve both day and evening uses and to offer potential for seasonal events. It will provide an area of passive recreation for teenagers, young adults. It's going to be a place to meet and socialise and relax. And we've worked closely with the planning authority to ensure the size of the piazza does not feel too empty or uninviting, and that the street furniture and benches do not block pedestrian flows. Just to touch on street furniture in a bit more detail, the case officer's report has highlighted that it's felt some of the concrete benches and bollards will be angular in design and could have a clinical and harsh appearance, that they may not weather well, which I think has been the experience of some of the street furniture around BH2. And there's a preference to use warmer and more rounded timber and stone materials. We've looked at this quite carefully, and in the interest of consistency and the appearance of the wider scheme and their longevity, we feel this is appropriate. However, we accept that landscape details are ultimately going to be agreed through condition, so there's an opportunity for officers to work with BDC on the final choices. We've got a good provision of green roofs in the scheme, as Mr. Raven has said, and that's an appropriate response, we think, in terms of an aesthetic contribution, and also in terms of their role in intercepting rainwater, sequestering carbon, and providing wildlife for habitat. So we're pleased with the finished result. Quite a lot of detail came in this application in the form of a planting strategy document, which explains the 6 different planting zones and how development will be complementary plant and shrub species and will be used to create distinctive places. Again, the final planting strategy will need to be agreed via condition. But we've demonstrated that a lot of thought and passion have gone into creating a high quality and inspiring space, and it will be a truly great resource. So to conclude, BDC is to bring forward a high quality landscape scheme that is very similar in intent to the outline planning permission. It calls to national and local planning policy, and it will make a positive contribution to the appearance and character of the area. The determination of the application reps over 4 years, just got one sentence if I may, represents over 4 years of engagement with the local planning authority to bring forward a development that will transform this part of the town centre, deliver new homes, jobs and leisure spaces. It's sustainable and a scheme that the town can be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. My question related to the Piazza, I think it's just been answered in the statement that's been given, but the question I had was related to the size. We are looking at, which has been reduced from the original layout scheme, I understand. That's what it says in the report. It's been reduced in size. I just wondered how much it had been reduced in size from the original scheme. The layout allows for future pedestrian desire lines and has been reduced in overall size to ensure it doesn't appear or feel empty and uninviting when not in use for events. And I understand it's an important part of the site, and when the original outline permission was given, it was obviously took into account the size of the public space in the Piazza area. It was an essential part of it. Now it's been reduced, and the question is, how much has it been reduced by, and is it significant? Is it something I should be thinking about or not? And the second question I've got, and maybe so it can be answered at the same time, maybe, is the public art. Where it talks about the developer providing a public art, an art scheme, which is intended. It's been suggested it will be integrated into the fabric of the public-facing parts of the building, as well as the public spaces. Now, to me, that means it affects the way the building looks, which is actually about the appearance of the building that was approved at the original application, which suggests it could change as a result of the art being implemented within the fabric of the building. I mean, taking it to extreme, you could have in theory, a huge, great big mural up the side of the building with something written on it. I mean, I don't know. So I'd just like a bit of clarification about what the intent is behind the application of the art into the fabric of the building. Those just 2 points of clarification, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Mr. Raven, would you like to address those?
Yeah, certainly. Going back to the Piazza issue, I think that was my fault in terms of the drafting of the report. The actual change in the size of the Piazza happened at the outline stage. So if you look at the screen in front of you, this element was part of the originally tabled Piazza element, but that was negotiated to basically be reduced to this size under the outline application. So I apologise for any issues there, any confusing issues, sorry. In terms of the public art, I mean, what we were envisaging was something not entirely large, something like it could be like on Pier Approach, you've got the fossils embedded into the ground, just something more tactile, something that adds interest, nothing that's going to drastically alter the external appearance of the building at all. So, I mean, in terms of the materials, in terms of the appearance, the building will essentially be as approved. Again, the condition allows for an input from the local authority in terms of what the public art will constitute, and that will obviously be a discussion that's had at a later date with the actual developers.
Can I just one more point on that, please, Chair? But it says in the report that whilst the council can make an input into that, it's not within its decision-making powers to decide, and it's for the developer to decide. So is it conceivable that the developer will make the decision that may be contrary to what the council actually wants?
Having spoken to the developer, they moved to the idea of putting a competition out to local schools. So local children involved in the area can have an input into the actual provision of the public art. And we thought that to have a local authority veto on that once a school or child had their design agreed would not be conducive to a great public benefit or a good PR exercise.
Any other members have any questions or comments on this application?
Thank you, Chair. It's just probably more comment. Condition 8, landscape maintenance, although there's no detail there because it's currently not available, probably stating the obvious, but I would like to see that included in there. Any planting that for whatever reason doesn't take, i.e. it dies, that it is actually replaced as opposed to just left there looking rather sorry for itself.
Mr. Raven, any comment on that?
I think that's part and parcel of the continual maintenance, and in our experience, that includes replacing anything that has died or is not looking at its best.
Okay, so if no one has anything else to say, we'll go to the vote. Oh, sorry, Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. No, I was actually just going to propose that we move the officers' recommendations on this. This is an application that has been going on and on and on and on and on and on, and we finally need to get to the end of the road with this one. So happy to move the officers' recommendations, Chairman.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor McCormack?
I second that.
All those in favour of the application, please raise your hand.
That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Any against? Any abstentions?
1 abstention.
Just because I wasn't here before the picture.
Thank you. So that application has been approved. Thank you. Moving on, the next application we have Councillor Trenton McCormack. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, Chairman, land south of the southern side of Talbot Village. Proposal is for a digital exchange, essentially a temporary office building intended in many respects as a precursor to the innovation centre that's envisaged as part of the development around the university. So somewhere where new enterprises can potentially assemble with new enterprises potentially with a close relationship to the centres of excellence represented by the university. So a hub for innovation. It sits within a policy context, both within the pool local plan and a supplementary guide. Let me take you through the key policies because all of them are pertinent to your consideration of the application. Area TV1, top right shaded blue, is identified as an area for the expansion of Bournemouth University. TV2 is the long-term ambition for redevelopment of that land as the permanent innovation quarter. TV3 is a heathland support area intended to grow, if you like, and link up elements of existing protected heathland, SSI, Ramsar, which includes these areas and these areas. So, as it stands, a temporary proposal for a temporary office building. The red circle identifies where the building would go, and as you can see, it's within the expansion of the university area rather than the innovation centre area. So to put that more precisely, the mauve shading at the bottom of the screen is the future permanent innovation centre. The blue area identifies for expansion of the university. You'll have seen from your papers that neither the Arts University nor the university have any issues with the temporary use of this land. It would not prejudice any plans that they have within the timescale envisaged by the temporary planning permission that's being sought for the Innovation Centre. To the left there, something we'll come back to, the existing village surgery, which is a 1 and 2 storey building, the 2-storey element being at this western part of the structure, the element nearest to the boundary of the site on which the building here will go is single storey. So again, to put it in the wider context, the future growth of the university into this area, the innovation area to the south, and the heathland expansion and support area associated with existing areas of heathland to the south and west. Put a little bit of context to the building. Top photograph is the existing, is the student accommodation previously approved by Borough of Poole, now well advanced in terms of its implementation. To the left, the existing village centre, which includes the village surgery. And the bottom screen is the village surgery. So as I alluded to earlier, the 2-storey element further away from the boundary, the single-storey element closest to the boundary, very substantial hedgerow between the edge of the surgery site and the application site. Again, to just give it a little bit more context, the views across the open field within which the Innovation Centre will sit, which is approximately within this part of the field, adjacent to that hedgerow. Again, the village surgery beyond and the new student accommodation. Tellingly, in that photograph, there are 2-storey porta-cabin buildings being used as site offices already associated with the redevelopment of the site for student accommodation. Those are the modules that essentially will be at the heart of the building, those kind of modules, be at the heart of the building that you're being asked to consider, albeit that they will be clad. Again, to put the wider context, the building will be in the bottom right-hand corner, as it were, of this field. You can see beyond a very well-established line of trees, and to the left, the existing university car parking area. The building itself is... We can use the word port cabin because it is a port cabin. They're very protective of that trade name when you talk about modular buildings. It will, however, be clad. The ground floor predominantly in brick, the upper floor, I believe, with cladding. Again, if I can just draw your attention to the nature of that building. This elevation, the top elevation, is the elevation that would face the village surgery. Moving to the end elevations, no windows on the ground floor, and moving to that relationship with the village surgery. If I draw your attention to the photographs down the right-hand side, these were taken from approximately first floor level, provided by the applicants, but we have no reservations whatsoever about their accuracy. Taken from first floor level and given an indication of the relationship of the first floor accommodation in the proposed building and the adjacent surgery. You can see that there's something of the order of 22 metres separation between the side elevation of the digital exchange building and the first floor windows, these first floor windows in the surgery. There are windows at ground floor level along this eastern elevation of the surgery, and there are windows on the west elevation of the exchange building, but the level of screening provided by the existing tree screen hedgerow between the two is such that there is no we have no concerns about the relationship. There has been some issues raised by the users of the surgery about privacy, but clearly the screening that exists and other measures that can be introduced did not preclude the building being that close to the surgery. Looking at that relationship in detail, again looking at the elevation that faces the surgery, ground floor, the bottom plan, an area, a canteen breakout area with high level windows, with conventional windows and high level windows to what's essentially a server area to accommodate the equipment associated with the kind of uses that would be associated there. So basically plant and server area. First floor, conventional windows apart from the landing window, so conventional windows to the offices, open plan offices that would comprise the entirety of the first floor. The proposals have been subject of very intense scrutiny in terms of ensuring that they do provide betterment in terms of the habitat on the site. The Biodiversity Enhancement and Mitigation Plan that supports the application has had very substantial scrutiny as part of this process, has been signed off to by the Dorset National Environment Team, who would perhaps in times gone by when they were Hampshire County Council's National Environment Team would have been a consultee to this. They are no longer, of course, we don't have that relationship with them anymore. But the applicants have chosen to put their scrutiny before that team, who are recognised experts in the field and have the confidence of Natural England, such that we are now content that the Biodiversity Enhancement and Mitigation Scheme meets all of the requirements for the site, has been signed off to by Natural England, and therefore there are no concerns about the impact of what will be, after all, a temporary building erected on a future development site, which will presumably give way in the fullness of time to the substantial innovation centre envisaged for the site. Chairman, the recommendation before you is to grant a temporary 5-year planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. We have a number of people speaking. Oh, thank you. Right. So Sheila Warner and Nick Dobbs, you're sharing the 5 minutes. Would you like to come forward and? Yep. So Sheila Warner. Oh, you've changed, have you? Right. Okay. No, that's fine. Whatever, how it works.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillors, I know that some of you are very familiar with Talbot Heath. In 2.5 minutes, it is a challenge to capture what an extraordinary nature reserve we have in the heart of our conurbation and the well-being and joy it affords locals on their doorsteps. By grace and favour of the existence of Highmoor Farm, Talbot Heath is the last fragmented lowland heathland in the town that has not been completely surrounded at the margins by development and is regarded as the most pristine, biodiverse, rich urban example of a type of habitat which the UK has lost 95% of. Plot R being considered today is within 400 metres of Talbot Heath and the beginning of TVT's financial aspirations to develop Highmoor Farm, which will render Talbot Heath completely surrounded by development, the consequences on protected species being unknown. Why unknown? The pool plan places emphasis on achieving net gains in biodiversity. If one is going to measure net gains, there has to be a baseline before development starts. At no point since 2015 has TVT or other vested stakeholders commissioned any actual baseline studies of Talbot Heath or Highmoor Farm. Instead, TVT's strategy is to develop Highmoor Farm land parcel by land parcel, discharging ecological planning conditions through mitigation on a similar application by application basis, denuding each adjacent parcel of land of wildlife as they go. What does mitigation look like in the case of Plot R, which we're considering today? 2 bat boxes, 1 sparrow box and 4 sapling trees with no post-development monitoring proposed whatsoever. Conscience clearing in all but name. Pool Planning Policy PP 33 9.66 empowers you, the Council, to make every effort to safeguard designated protected habitats such as Talbot Heath, and I quote, "The Council will ensure that there is adequate implementation of biodiversity mitigation and monitoring of net gains secured through the planning system. The records of habitats and species held by DIRC serve to provide a useful desktop guide for developers to understand the known protected species present, but may need to be supplemented by further surveys and baseline species studies undertaken by the developer. The Council will also proactively encourage developers to submit their species recordings to DIRC. Councillors, I don't envy your deliberations today, but you are very much part of a more enlightened and considered approach to protecting nature and the proven well-being and health benefits it affords our communities. I would ask this planning committee, using the powers vested in you under PP 33 9.66, to reject this application and oblige TVT to first provide a comprehensive, up-to-date baseline species study of Talbot Heath and Highmoor Farm at the beginning of their development aspirations, i.e. Plot R, and not when they apply to lay the last brick on Highmoor Farm." Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Sheila Warner, Committee Member, Talbot and Branksome Woods Residents Association. In his examination of the Pool Local Plan 2018, the Inspector instructed the writing of a separate policy, PP21, to provide absolute clarity for all future developments in Talbot Village Site A3. The citing of the digital exchange B1 business usage does not accord with policy PP21. The introduction of the B1 usage into the TV1 part of Site A3, usage which PP21 assigns to TV2, clearly prejudices the delivery of the requirements set out in 2A for TV1, as it will be on land allocated for the expansion of the 2 universities. PP21 says at 2E, a heathland support area, TV3, must be provided and open to the public before the delivery of development required by 2B, C and D. That is the innovation quarter, the ancillary uses and the new housing. This application seems to be an attempt by the landowner Talbot Village Trust to put the digital exchange into TV1 in order to circumvent this necessity of first opening up TV3. The relevance of this circumvention has totally escaped the case officer, who in her report in paras 24, 26 and 27 wrongly states that TV3 is Talbot Heath. It is not. It is fields. See figure 30, page 74, Pool Local Plan. In her report, the case officer says, para 31, that the proposal could be considered a precursor to the future development of the digital village, albeit that the site falls within TV1. Her advice is to grant permission, even though she acknowledges in para 79 that it is not in accordance with PP21. Are you supposed to ignore policy PP21 of the Pool Local Plan on the basis that it is a temporary building, temporarily obviously in the wrong area, which TVT says they can in a couple of years on link into TV2? Is this how planning in the new BCP Council is going to be going forward? A fudge of convenience? Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Lamb. Again, as you know, you have 5 minutes.
Chairman, members, thank you for letting us speak. Before I just comment on some of the site-specific points raised, I'd just like to say a few words about the Trust, if I may. As many of you will know, the Trust was established around 150 years ago with the aim of providing employment and accommodation to those in need. The aim of the Trust today hasn't changed. It supports those in need through extensive charitable giving and the use of land owned by the Trust to provide homes, employment and enrichment opportunities. At Talbot, this has entailed partnering with Bournemouth University and the Arts University Bournemouth, both tenants of the Trust, to enable them to develop top-class universities, helping young people to learn and grow. The Trust has also historically sold land to be developed, which now includes homes for people and families from all walks of life. But the Trust has never been about standing still. It wants a thriving village community to be sustainable into the future. This means building community infrastructure that helps create a place that people want to come work and live in, including attracting Bournemouth graduates to stay and contribute to the town. Crucially, just as the founders of the Talbot Village Trust intended, it also means enabling job creation and opportunities. The Digital Exchange will do this by providing space and infrastructure over the next 5 years for jobs aligned to the fourth industrial revolution and the digital economy. Aligning seamlessly with the Talbot Village Trust ethos, the Digital Exchange will function as an incubator for start-up and small businesses looking to grow. If successful, these businesses can then move out and establish a base within the digital village or elsewhere in the conurbation. These high-tech jobs could leverage university expertise in areas including cybersecurity, health, tech, computer animation, media or virtual reality. These sectors will be truly sustainable and would help keep the economy of the whole conurbation sustainable too. However, these are untested waters for the area. That's why the Trust has proposed a 5-year period to test the viability of the Digital Exchange project. If it's a success, a permanent home for the Digital Exchange could be developed, either on the site or elsewhere, subject, of course, to securing the necessary planning permissions at that time. So just to touch on the principle of development, which I think is something the objectors have commented on. With a view, and so is the planning authority, that the development proposed is acceptable for this site. It forms part of the strategic employment land allocation in the pool local plan, while the Talbot Academic Quarter is allocated for the expansion of Bournemouth University and the Arts University, as has been highlighted today under PP21. The Talbot Village SPD acknowledges that if not all land is required by the universities, it could be used for other forms of development, and the DX proposal before you today is not precluded from the wording of PP21, provided the overall objectives of policy are not compromised. And we've had confirmation from both Bournemouth University and Arts University Bournemouth that they have no immediate plans to expand into the site, and therefore the planning officer has been able to conclude that there will be no conflict with PP21 if planning permission is granted for a temporary period. As I said, it's important to recognise that the proposal would create space for start-ups and small businesses, and it's also part of the intention to introduce high-speed wireless internet connections extending north and south, potentially to the future innovation quarter in the future. So to touch on amenity quickly, we have had very careful regard to the doctor's surgery next door, and I think it's been demonstrated through the information you've seen today that there isn't going to be an impact on amenity, a harmful impact by virtue of overlooking privacy, noise or any of those factors. There's a decent separation distance. There's already a very established vegetation boundary between the site and the ground floor consulting rooms. The upper floors of the surgery are not used for primary functions. They're secondary space, and we do not believe there's going to be any overhearing of sensitive conversations from within inside the surgery, given that both properties would be are going to be well insulated. We're also not aware of any formal plans for the surgery to want to expand. The Trust talks to surgery from time to time, and there is nothing formal on the table. And of course, this is a temporary planning permission, if you like, for 5 years, so it wouldn't preclude that in the future if that was an option that came forward. We've undertaken extensive ecological survey work. You've seen that's in the reports today. That's included work looking at badgers and also at reptiles, and an appropriate mitigation strategy has been proposed to address that. And in terms of the quality of the mitigation and biodiversity gain proposed, it's important to note that that's been signed off by Dorset NET, by the Council's ecology officer, and Natural England, in respect to the relationship with the site with the heath, has not objected either. So we've satisfied all of the consultees in that respect.
Local Councillor Rampton, do you want to come? Can you put your microphone on, please? Can you put your microphone on, please?
Oh. Shall I start again? Thank you. Members, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. You've heard compelling reasons from Mr. Dobbs and from Mrs. Warner as to why this application should be refused on ecological grounds, and for the very simple reason that the application is on land allocated in the Poole local plan for a different purpose. As one of Talbot and Branksome Wood's councillors, I am speaking on behalf of Talbot Village Residents Association, who represent local residents, many of whom have made written representations, over 260 in fact. And I've spoken to many others, and all are against this application. Those of you who may have had an opportunity to visit the proposed site will have noticed the current building project of accommodation for 300 students of the Arts University Bournemouth. The majority of those students will need to register at the Talbot Village Surgery, which adjoins this proposed site. They will not be able to use the Bournemouth University Student Surgery. The Talbot Village Surgery has objected to this application, and for very good reasons. Not only are they concerned about overlooking and loss of privacy in their consulting rooms, they are desperate to expand. They are near capacity already. There are over 1,000 Talbot Village residents, many of whom are registered here. I've spoken with a practice manager. They have approached the landowners of the site with a view to leasing the land, and they were turned down, presumably because of their wish to bring this commercial building forward. So it really is quite astonishing that paragraph 6.9.14 of the supplementary planning document 2015 for Talbot Village, which is a material planning consideration, states development proposals adjacent to the surgery should consider the potential need to expand the surgery and address parking constraints, of which there are many, I have to say. And on your planning update sheet, the Dorset Clinical Commissioning Group has made representation about the need to expand this surgery. This proposed development prejudices their expansion plans. In the preceding Poole Council, I was a portfolio holder for adult health and social care. I know how important integrated services are and how key our partnerships are with health. We should listen to and work with our partners in health. If this application were to be granted, I'm told the surgery will need to relocate in order to expand, putting hundreds of residents, including those living in the sheltered accommodation in Gillette Road, and of course the students, at a detriment. Members, this application fails to comply with the allocations in the Poole local plan. It fails to comply with the SPD for Talbot Village. The report notes it, but then ignores it. It misleads you by suggesting neither of the universities need this space. The letters actually don't say that. The report claims support from officer groups, but rather the officers don't raise objections. This is not the same thing at all, and it is actually misleading. There's emphasis on this being a temporary building, but that's only if a replacement building is built in the correct place in TV2. There is no guarantee that would happen. This proposed development could well become a permanent structure. This application is for a commercial building on a green field, on a piece of land which will be desperately needed, and certainly within 5 years, by a community facility, that GP surgery. Ironically, consultation has already started on the new conurbation-wide local plan, and it's asking residents for feedback to guide future development. This application is a Trojan horse. It's a cynical and barely disguised attempt to test the appetite for a digital village while avoiding the investment of a TV3 Heathland support. BCP is a green council. There's an opportunity today to keep a part of Talbot Village green, to consider and protect residents' amenities, to listen to them and allow them to consult on a new local plan. Members, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Hampson. Okay, members, there you have it. Do we have any comments or questions you'd like to ask? Councillor Miller.
Yeah, I'll kick off as the ward councillor. Some questions first, please. Doug, the report states to start off with that some representations were made. I think Councillor Rampton alluded to a number, but as a statement of more fact, how many representations were made on this scheme?
Sorry, Chair, I don't have the actual number for you, but I would guesstimate in the order of 70 or 80. A significant number of representations, I believe, were made.
There's actually over 260 on the system, and
There they are.
yeah,
There are the representations. 200 of our residents objected. Sorry for interrupting. I know I shouldn't speak. Thank you.
John, the reason that I don't allude to numbers is we quite often don't allude to number of representations, because clearly one representation making a valid point is the same as 50 people making the same point. It is, if it's a valid point, it's a valid point, and we'll address it.
I understand that, Doug, and I fully appreciate it. The point
I apologise for not having that number to hand. Sorry.
Yeah, historically, when I've seen a lot of these reports, I think the number is often there, and I think it's actually important because if the community are engaged, we often will sit on a planning application and say, well, nobody's objected to it, so okay, we don't like it, but there's something, So I think it's important to say it's not just been some representations. There's been significant and probably more than we've had on any number of applications since BCP's been in existence. Another question, Doug. PP21 around TV1223. The report states that this is a fact counter to PP21. So when was our local plan adopted that had PP21 in it?
This was at the end of last year, November.
Yeah, great. That's enough, Doug. Thanks. So effectively, this is a brand new local plan, one of the newest local plans in the country, and our officers have written a report that says the fact that it doesn't attune to PP21, and further down the line, effectively saying because the people have said they don't need it for the use they needed it for at the back end of last year. I think that's well, I've made my point. Can I ask you about, you used the word temporary a number of times, and I appreciate this is a temporary planning application. Paragraph 41 states that this is a greenfield site. So when, just for my own benefit, Doug, so when this is built, I'm presuming, from reading from this, it's going to be effectively tarmacked, and greenfield would be ripped up, and there's a new road going in which isn't on a greenfield. What would your version of that be? If in 5 years' time, would you then call this site in 5 years' time a greenfield site, or would you call that a brownfield site?
I wouldn't want to anticipate what any new local plan that would emerge over that 5-year period would say about this site. I think the question of whether it is a brownfield or a greenfield site doesn't actually arise. It's a site allocated for development. It's identified for development. This proposal is a temporary use. It would not become a permanent use without this authority giving it further permissions, and because it is identified for other uses, if that other use had come forward, or the need for that other use was still identified and had come forward in the meantime, I would imagine that we wouldn't be seeking to allow the retention of that building if the designated use of the land had come forward.
I understand what you're saying in terms of a local plan. The point I'm making is our report states it's a greenfield site, and it's a matter of fact that as soon as this is passed, it won't be a greenfield site, regardless of whether it's in the local plan as a greenfield site. Doug, could you comment on a question in relation to what our local plan or the SPD says about the doctor's surgery? And I think Councillor Rampton alluded to it. If you could just get me up to speed on what our plan actually states about the surgery. I appreciate the representation from the CCG we've just received.
Joan, the plan itself is silent on the expansion of the surgery, but the TV2 area identified on the screen, which is the innovation board. If I can perhaps read you just what policy PP21 says. Growth at Talbot Village will be carefully developed to deliver, and then an innovation quarter, TV2, on land at and around Highmoor Farm, comprising up to 25,000 square metres gross floor area to help support the role and function of the universities, and comprising a mix of B1 uses, healthcare facilities, and other university-related uses. So there is actually a specific provision within the TV2 area for, quote, healthcare facilities. So provision is made in that respect. There's no explicit provision made for the expansion adjacent to its existing site of the surgery, but that doesn't, of course, preclude separate development within the TV2 area as part of the development that comes forward there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. More technical point then, in terms of the paragraph 72, we talk about the drainage system. I was slightly confused as to why we say we should need a drainage system there, but this application doesn't have one. So could you just elaborate on that for me, please?
Yes, John. I think the issue here is proportionality in terms of for a building which is clearly a temporary building and has been designed as such, not suitable for permanent retention, wouldn't be perhaps countenanced for permanent retention. It's about providing a proportionate response to the requirements, so that, for instance, just to take a step further, it doesn't meet its requirements in terms of renewable energy generation on the site. Again, that would be onerous for it over the temporary period of the life of the building. It deals with runoff from the car parking area, which is a significant part of the site, by the use of porous surfacing to ensure that there's no increased demand from that part of the site on mains drainage. I believe stormwater, however, from the building is intended to go into existing sewers, stormwater sewers, because again it would be a disproportionate requirement for that building, for the life of that building, to require full mitigation within the site. So I think it keeps coming back on each occasion to what is a proportionate response to the temporary nature of the building.
Thank you, Doug. So, so what I draw from that is the fact that so you said it doesn't meet the renewable needs of the site. It doesn't meet the drainage needs, of the site, because it's a temporary application. So actually, the fact it's a temporary application is actually significantly worse for this site than if it was a permanent application. Chairman, if I may, I'll stop my questions there. A few things I'd like to say. I might then I'll look to the debate and then come back, but. From my perspective, I think this is a really, really important. Forget the area of where this is, but it's, in terms of a local plan, which is the most up-to-date local plan in the country practically, and we're now writing a report that says we can actually. Sorry, does Peter want to come in? But yeah, so so I think the precedent we're setting when we're effectively, we take our training seriously in and around. These are material planning considerations, and that document is really, really, sacrosanct. So we might sit on this committee and actually say, well, I don't like this, but I have to accept it because our document, our material document says it. And now we're getting, when something doesn't, apply to it, our officers say, well, actually, that's fine because you can circumvent it. I think, the point made by Sheila Warner is valid. That feels to me like a sham, and. I think you've also got a point around the reason we're saying that we don't need that now, that land for that now, is because there's a letter from AUB and Bournemouth University, which are key stakeholders and are really important stakeholders in our community, as is the Talbot Village Trust. But we shouldn't be allowing our stakeholders, who are effectively developers, to be dictating to us about whether our planning document should be changed or not. I think residents should have as much weight. We as members should have as much weight as developers in terms of changing our or dictating to us around moving away from our plan. I think the CCG representation is really important. So we're now in a situation where we've got both the doctor surgery have objected to this, and the CCG in as strong terms as possible. They have said that we strongly oppose this, not just because of the building next to it and the impact it will have on, but this is as ward councillors we've had discussions with the surgery for a number of years. That surgery is full. They will. That it is a business. They will move it. They are. If they can't expand it, they will move it. The applicant said really carefully, and I think this is important, nothing formal on the table from the surgery. That's actually quite a clever use of words. There is nothing formal on the table now, because when they've been approached, when TVT have been approached about it, the doctor of surgery wants to move this forward. TVT have said no. So that's the reason nothing formal is on the table. The doctor of surgery want to grow. Let's be really, really clear about that. They've been rebuffed, and they will move if they cannot grow the site in the next 5 years. Yeah. I'll wrap up. We've got a greenfield site here, temporary or not. You're building a road on it. You're putting a building on it. You're tarmacking it. This is not going to be a greenfield site by the time we've finished with it. I think I'll just move you to paragraph 78 in terms of the officer's summary, because we've got to really consider how much of a mockery we want to make of this planning process. Retain important trees and provide additional planting to intensify the verdant character of the area. So we're building a building, we're building a road on a field, and you're telling me, I mean, honestly, I mean, like, it's absolutely bonkers to suggest that's going to intensify the character of the area. Last bullet point, preserve the protected species in the vicinity of the site and secure biodiversity enhancements. Who are we kidding? You're building a building and a road on a greenfield site, and somebody has had the gall to type, we're going to get biodiversity enhancements. Come on, this is absolutely bonkers. We don't need to do this. We shouldn't do it ethically. We shouldn't do it because for planning reasons, this is against our local plan. We shouldn't do it, and it's absolutely a nonsense, and it makes a mockery of the consultations we've had on the local plan and this scheme. We might like to come back, but I appreciate I've already spoken for probably much more longer than anybody would have appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, I'd like to ask the officer, because in my experience, when we've had temporary accommodation granted, at the end of the 3 years, 5 years, it's almost impossible then to refuse an application. Would you agree with that?
Chairman, as long as there's a requirement for an application, there is always the option open to the local planning authority to refuse permission. The rationale behind a temporary building or the granting of a temporary permission is usually for a small range of reasons. A trial period, sometimes you'll approve things for a temporary period, for a trial period only. You will approve things temporarily because they're only required for a temporary period. Sometimes the requirement will extend into a further time period. Most education authorities have temporary classrooms that have lasted generations. So there is always the possibility of a further application to extend that temporary period, but you should not allow that to prejudice your decision on the initial application, because there will be that opportunity to come back and determine whether it should remain longer at the end of that period. If the circumstances, conditions are the same, you may choose as a local planning authority to do so, but at the moment the request or the application is solely for a 5-year period, and that, if you were to grant this permission, would be all that building would be entitled to remain. And again, the conditions set out are very explicit about the requirement for the removal of the building and the reinstatement of the site at the end of that period. Given that the site is allocated for other development, I'd suggest that this may not be a long-term building beyond the 5-year period that is being asked for.
Thank you for that answer. I don't quite agree with your answer anyhow, but I think that it's such an important site that, in my opinion, this application should be refused. Thank you.
Are you proposing that, Councillor Hall? Or?
I'll be very happy to propose it should be refused.
Councillor, second. Do we have anybody who wants to speak before we go to a vote? Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, I've got a few questions actually for clarification. The doctor's surgery seems to be playing quite an important part in this. Is there an extant planning application for the surgery at the moment, looking to expand?
Chairman, no, there isn't.
Thank you. I was a bit concerned about the SUDs, or lack of SUDs on the building. 5 years is actually quite a long period, and to not have a SUDs arrangement over that period, I think, is a bit short-sighted. But that's just a comment, not a question. All right, I'm not, generally we're trying to get away from putting surface water into the sewer. We shouldn't be doing it. Wherever we can avoid it, we should be. And there's no reason, if you're putting in permeable surfaces in a car park, you should be able to run water off a roof into a soakaway, basically. I think that's a mistake. I think this is the crux of it. So I understand it. Could you just confirm who the landowner is?
Chairman, I believe the village trust are the owners of the site, but let me just check that first, because it is important. Chairman, the applicants are Talbot Village Trust, and they have signed certificate A, which indicates that nobody other than the applicant has an interest in the land, so they are the owners of the site.
Okay, thanks. So if this had been an application for a permanent location, with the current policy at the moment, a permanent location for this type of business, it would have been allocated to TV3, is that correct? Sorry, okay, sorry, TV2?
TV2 is the appropriate location for the Innovation Centre in the future, yes.
Okay, so it's been, they want to put this building in TV1 because it's a business they're not sure of about the longevity or whether it's a sustainable business. But so to reduce the risk that the financial risk that they have, they put it in a site that's more readily accessible on land that they already own. To put it into TV2 is ultimately going to cost a lot more in terms of infrastructure and location costs at this time. I guess that's the what I'm getting from this. Would you agree with that?
Chairman, I'm not sure it's something that can come on because it's anticipating or second guessing the reasons for the applicant making the application. The application is before us, and that's, as it were, the starting point for our consideration of it, rather than what alternative locations there could have been.
I understand your approach on this. It's like a yes, Minister question, isn't it? I couldn't possibly comment, could I? It's probably the answer, but that probably is the answer. That it's of course you've got to balance that against the huge potential advantages of this facility to both the university and the site and the purposes for what the trust is trying to achieve. And so I've got a real dichotomy here between the two. What is the overall benefit to the greater public and the businesses and the people living in the area in terms of jobs and employment and all the rest of it, balanced against those very real concerns of the residents. But I have to say that I'm sort of leaning very much towards the residents on this, and the reason for that is that there's been this huge number of objections. And I'm slightly amazed, actually, and I hope you don't mind saying this, but you weren't aware of the magnitude of the objections that there have been. Now, I was gobsmacked when I eventually got onto the pool planning site, and that was actually very difficult to do this week, I have to say. And having got onto it, the number of objections that there were, and that in itself, I think as Councillor Mellor says, has got to count, for substantial weight. And whilst there may not in themselves be material objections specifically, you cannot ignore the weight of public feeling on that, which makes me feel the balance is judgment is going that way because there are just so many. I also question, would this application actually have come to the board at all, given that the reason it's into the board is because it was called in? So, would it have been called in? If it hadn't been called in, would it have come to the board?
No.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, that, isn't it? Because that's not the reason it says it's in here. So I think this falls down on this. We've got to take into account what our residents want, and when there are so many people objecting to a development, we've really got to take it seriously. Got to take on board what's being said, and I don't think that their concerns have been adequately addressed in this report. And so, I'm going to support Councillor Hall on his move. I think it's already got a seconder, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Mrs. Berrible.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to come back on a point Councillor Bartlett made. I just would like to remind members that the actual amount of objectors is irrelevant to your considerations. Obviously, you're only considering it on planning grounds, so you could have one objector and that would hold more weight potentially than 200 objectors if they hadn't got a planning reason. So I just wanted to remind members that it was not uppermost in their mind, or it shouldn't be. The weight or the number of objectors is not the weight of the objectors.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's probably been timed quite well, the officer's response to Councillor Bartlett's point about the number of objections. that an application should be considered for planning reasons and not the number of objections. Well, I think if you look at the report, paragraph 79 actually sums it up very nicely. And for the benefit of those that haven't got papers in front of them, it says, it is acknowledged that the development, as proposed, does not provide academic space, as proposed by PP21. Furthermore, it fails to provide for energy efficiency as required by PP31. And I understand that it is also against provisions within the Talbot Village SPD. But yet, by virtue of the fact that this is granted for a temporary period of 5 years, and I think 5 years is actually semi-permanent, depending on what you are comparing it against. I think that if this was an application for a permanent building, it would have been refused. So I don't see the difference between temporary and permanent. If it doesn't accord with the planning policies, then by virtue of that fact, I think it should be refused, because then we're consistent in the application of our plans. Other people have actually talked, I think Mr. Dobbs has mentioned about the biodiversity and the protected species. And he talks about para 9.66, which is to do with biodiversity, that there should be a net gain. Yet contained within the recommendations and the conditions relating to biodiversity, it says, if you commence work and you find a protected species, you are to stop so that we can work out what we're going to do with moving them. So I guess the other way of looking at it is you commence a development and you don't see these little creatures because some of them are quite small, so you're actually losing them. So how that is actually in accordance with net gain, I fail to see that. And I'm actually quite pleased that Councillor Hall has actually made a proposal to refuse, because I'm actually inclining towards supporting that proposal. Thank you.
Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just a point of clarification, please, from Mr. Evans, if I may. Temporary use. Who does it go to? Does it go to the actual applicant? Does it go to the use of the building? What I'm thinking of is if in a year's time this so-called business doesn't work, it could be changed to something else, which will be even less desirable in that area.
The use goes with the land. So it doesn't go with the owners at the current time, it doesn't go with the applicants, it stays with the land. So whoever owns the land has the benefit of the planning permission. The planning permission is, I've wobbled backwards and forwards between describing it as an innovation centre and a digital exchange, and it's essentially an office building. It's essentially an office building intended for a particular kind of use, and the internal layout shown in the drawings implies a certain kind of use, and its proximity to the university implies a certain kind of use. So it is essentially a very use-specific office building, and the planning permission would run with the land.
And if I may, Chairman, just going back to the remarks that Ms Barrable made, whilst I fully understand and accept her remarks, I think what Councillor Bartlett was trying to point out was that in the planning portal that we use now, to get something into the planning board, it either has to be called in or have significant public interest, and 270 odd objections, in my opinion, would deem to be significant public interest. And I do find it very strange that this was not brought to the planning board under that proposal rather than having to be called in. And I think it's something that maybe the chairman needs to take back to the portfolio holder and have that looked at again. Thank you.
Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with what Councillor Haynes said, and particularly concerned about paragraph 79. When I looked at the site this morning, I didn't have the planning application in my hand other than the site plan, and there was would be no significant overlooking or imposition on the surgery next door as it stands. But I was a bit concerned that it was a completely new site. The application, in effect, is in land reserved for the university, where it should be in TV2, I believe. I am also concerned that it is designed for 30 employees. And if you look carefully, you've got 22 parking spaces and space for 8 bikes. So there isn't any option, there isn't space, there isn't secure parking for more than 8 bikes, so you can't have 10 or 15 or 20 choosing to come on their bike on a nice day. And if the weather's foul or you're knee-deep in snow, there's no room for more than 22 cars. So that was one of my issues on it. And the other point that struck me was it said permeable tarmac. Well, to me, that's a complete oxymoron. Permeable tarmac might be permeable for a brief time, but once you've got some sediment taken into the site, it soon becomes very non-permeable. And if we were minded to agree, I would ask for the whole area around it to be done with, I think it's called grass block paving, where you get spaces between and the grass can grow and the water can go down, but you get block paving with open spaces between. However, listening to the representations that have been made and the fact that it isn't in accordance with PP21 or PP37 or the Talbot Village SPD, I'm surprised we're even looking at it. And I think Mr. Evans was being slightly careful with what he said, because technically a temporary permission, he said next time round we could refuse it. We can't refuse it unless there are significant, if it's been okay for 5 years and we get the same application to come in to continue for the next 5 years, there have to be significant changes for you to be able to refuse it. You've got to have grounds to refuse it after you've once granted it. So this, yes, I think could be a permanent building on the site, or we couldn't refuse anything else that came in behind it. So I certainly don't feel nearly as comfortable as I did when I looked at the site earlier today.
Okay, members, so we have a proposal on the table from Councillor Hall, seconded by... Yeah, please.
Chairman, just, I'm mindful that there's a proposal on the table, but before we go to it, in terms of the planning balance, several members have highlighted paragraph 79 in the report, the omissions of the scheme, where it diverges from policy. If I can perhaps draw members' attention to 2 paragraphs lower down, paragraph 81. The proposed temporary use of this site provides for an important facility that will support university outcomes in the interim period, pending plans for the Innovation Quarter, in a manner that causes no material harm to the amenities of adjoining uses, to highway safety, or important ecological interest. I would ask, Chairman, that in framing the proposal that's before you and in framing the concerns that members have regard to what it says in that paragraph. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Miller.
Just in relation to that point, and I think it was Councillor Bartlett that effectively talked about why TV1, TV2, and it would cost more money to put it into TV2, so TV1 was a backdoor essence. So if what Doug's saying is right, in terms of there will be some benefit, then we'll do it properly. Do it how our plan said it should have been done in the first place, which is in TV2, and and alongside everything else. So again, I hear what Doug's saying in that point, but the point I think Councillor Bartlett was alluding to was we'll do it properly and don't fudge us.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. So we have a proposal on the table. Councillor Neil.
Yeah, just a rhetorical question. There's a lot of passion about greenfield sites, and there's a lot of passion about a permanent structure. And it all seems a bit confused to me. And the question I'd ask, and it is rhetorical, is the residents have objected quite substantially, and I understand why in part. But if this was an expansion of the doctor's surgery on that greenfield site, would they be equally protective of that site?
Thank you for your point, Councillor Neil. If members are ready, we'll take a vote on the proposal by Councillor Hall and seconded by Councillor Miller to not to allow the application. So those in favour of that proposal, please show.
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Those against? Those abstaining?
1, 2, 3.
That application is refused.
Chairman, having not approved it, having resolved to refuse, it's for the committee to put forward their reasons for which permission is being refused.
Yeah, certainly, Chairman. I believe it is TV2, PP21, PP37. That's good reasons contrary to those policies which have been established.
Excuse me, Chairman, with respect, we cannot refuse just by quoting policy numbers. What we would have to do is identify the harm. What is the harm? What is the material harm that arises from the development, and how does that material harm arise in terms of its being at odds with specific policies? Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Miller.
I think it's fair to say there is material harm in the fact that we've designated that site for a certain use, and this isn't it. And this is so you've heard the debate, you've heard the reasons we've refused this, and this isn't a refusal on impassioned grounds. For once, we can't often we get 260 people objecting to something often, and we can't actually listen to them because they're not using planning weighted arguments. Well, in this case, they are. So you've had a decent debate on it. I'm very happy to come up with some others, but you must be able to find some planning. This is clearly against our policy. So pick out something of that. But this.
Chairman, sorry to keep pressing the point, but we've been down this road before. And we do need to have clarity. From what I would understand is being said by the council is that because it's within the TV1 area, which is an area reserved for a specific purpose, which is the expansion of Bournemouth University and the Arts University, that this proposal, by inference, the suggestion is that it would prejudice the expansion of the university by granting this permission.
And in addition to that, it doesn't, the drainage issue. We think that should be taken more seriously. You mentioned inadequate parking. You mentioned the renewal. It didn't. I'm not sure we get the parking because that caused to RSPD. But the renewable needs. You said that yourself. It didn't satisfy that. Yeah. I mean. For sure.
So, Chairman, I'm hearing the fundamental point that permitting this development within the TV1 area would prejudice the expansion of Bournemouth University and the Arts University, according to the provisions of TV1. I would caution the members about throwing parking into the mix on the back of the conversations that we've had earlier in the day about parking, which more than satisfies your own guidance on car parking for this floor area. I'd draw your attention to the the addendum sheet, which had a further condition about more bicycle parking, so that could have been resolved. I hear what members say about renewables and sustainable drainage. The only bit that isn't sustainable in respect of development is is stormwater in respect of the footprint of the building, the roof of the building. So I think that taking parking out of the mix, which I would strongly recommend, renewables and drainage, both matters that could be relatively quickly remedied on a future application, I would suggest. The fundamental point of your resolution is that the proposals would prejudice the expansion, would prejudice the implementation of the expansion envisaged by policy TV1.
And it's not in accordance with RSPD.
And would delay the expansion of TV2. That's where
Chairman, I'm not sure we can have a reason for refusal based on it not being something else. I'd suggest that the fundamental point of the prejudicing the implementation of the envisaged use of TV1 is your fundamental concern that I've heard, and the inclusion of renewables and sustainable drainage in respect of the building itself, rather than the car park, because notwithstanding the councillor's comment,
Is the SPD not a material planning document? Is the SPD not? Surely something being contrary to the SPD is a good enough reason to start.
I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, Doug, I caution you just slightly here, because you're starting to make this process from my perspective, and I appreciate you're a professional officer in this role, but look like a farce. You know, we couldn't have been clearer in what we said. This has been the first time when we've been able to say, look, although as residents feel like this, it absolutely goes nowhere near getting towards, our planning documents. So please, in public, in this meeting, don't make us, and this process look even more, ridiculous than it often does.
Chairman, I'm sure you appreciate that because you're about to make a decision that we will be caused to, or you have made a decision which we will have to necessarily, potentially defend, which potentially puts the council in jeopardy of costs in terms of determining that. If that becomes an issue, these are all matters that in resolving this now, we put the council in the best position to defend the decision that you've now taken.
Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. I mean, what the appeals inspector do or don't do is for them to decide, and we shouldn't judge our decisions based on what the outcome of any appeal or cost or anything it's likely to be. That's not a material planning consideration either. But just let me finish. This is clearly, for the officers themselves, this is a balanced decision. This is a balanced decision because they know it's contrary to policies. This building should not be in that location. It should be in a different bit that's already approved for it. So I think there's already been a bit of a balancing act going on there. So clearly, and you've identified where the application is at variance to the policies. Now, you've gone down on the balance on one side. Clearly, the committee has gone on a balance on the other side. You already understand what the arguments are because you've made a balanced decision. Therefore, it should be very straightforward for you to actually look at the balance and say, well, this is the balance of the decision made by this committee. One thing that hasn't been mentioned about in terms of the balance is the potential impact on the restriction to TV1 in the future by allowing this, and the potential difficulties on extending this building for a permanent location. Because it's very, very difficult in the future to change your mind once something has been established for such a period. So whilst there may not be a conflict now, there could well be in 5 years' time. So, I think that does form part of the balance, and I think that you have sufficient information to be able to defend it and put a decision notice out on that basis.
Chairman, through you, having tested the robustness of what the committee want, which I'm required to do, and I'm sure you appreciate that, I think I have sufficient grounds to put together and properly capture your reasons for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, you may have seen a note being passed to me. Just to point out, I haven't read that note, and any comments have to be read out, said in the open, so that I haven't looked at that note. So whoever passed it, if they wish to make their comment in public, please do so. Are you satisfied, Mr. Evans, that you have?
Chairman, yes, I'm content that I can now capture the wishes of the committee.
Thank you. So, shall we move on to the final?
Excuse me, Chairman, are we moving on with the next item, or are we going to sit here talking?
Sorry, we were just consulting on an issue that was raised during that last item. Okay, moving forward to the next item, which is Rosemary Gardens in Poole. Is that you, Doug?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, 137 Rosemary Road, an outline application. Proposes to demolish an existing bungalow on site and erect a two-storey building comprising 4 two-bedroom flats. Put it into context, corner site at the junction of Rosemary Road and Good Road. over in the northwestern part of BCP. An established residential area with very mixed character in terms of wholly residential, but very mixed street scene in terms of the makeup and character. You can see 137, the application site in the centre of the top photograph. Small bungalow, adjacent property 139, again small bungalow. You can see beyond the junction with Good Road, again typical of the area, two-storey development across the road from the application site across Good Road. And again on the lower image you can see as you go further off down the street along the Rosemary Road frontage, 143, the bottom left-hand corner there, extending along number 147, two-storey. And you can see two-storey beyond. So very mixed character, I would suggest, of one and two-storey development. Certainly not homogeneous in terms of the bungalow that just happens to be on the application site and the adjoining site. Just picking up some of the relationships that are referenced in the report. 67 Good Road, so let me just put that back into the context of the site plan. 67 Good Road, 139 Rosemary Road. So 67 Good Road, the bungalow immediately to the rear of the site, and the relationship there with 67 Good Road. You'll see, and I particularly draw attention, a single high-level secondary window in the side elevation, the gable of 67 Good Road. 137, the application site. The red line is indicative of about where the rear elevation of the proposed building, we'll come back to that, sits relative to the rear of 67 Good Road. Lower image, again, you can see 67 Good Road, the application site, the white bungalow in the foreground. And you can see Chloe Gardens in the to the rear. These are two-storey homes which appear again on the site plan. That's the homes in that top right-hand corner, two-storey homes in excess of 20 metres from the rear of the proposed development on the application site. That proposal, in outline, but with the location scale, certainly location, siting, approved now in detail, if you are minded to do so. So the proposals show a two-storey building, picking up some of the architectural motifs of the area, very typical of the area in many respects. On that image, I particularly draw attention to the two windows in this side elevation. These are the windows that would be adjacent or nearest to the boundary with number 139 Rosemary Road. And as we move to the floor plan, so again highlight those two windows, both of which are two bathrooms. So in the elevation towards the bungalow on the Rosemary Road frontage, only two bathroom windows. The other thing I'd highlight on the floor plan layout is the configuration of the individual flats. Ground floor, living rooms, windows onto the dual road frontage of the site. So looking out onto the Rosemary Road frontage, looking out onto the Good Road frontage. And again on the first floor, Rosemary Road frontage, Good Road frontage, such that the windows to the rear elevation, other than to the landing going up to into the circulation space, all the windows on the rear elevation are to bedrooms in that scheme. So the relationship to the homes at the rear, only bedroom windows in a very typical relationship that you would expect to find in a mixed suburban area. Just to quantify that, of the order of 14 metres separation between those first floor bedroom windows and ground floor windows to the side elevation number 67 Good Road, something of the order of 3.5 metres separation between those two WC windows in the side elevation, the only windows in the side elevation of the proposal, relative to 139 Rosemary Road. 139 Rosemary Road does have windows in its side elevation. Those are very close to the boundary. And whilst that 3.5 separation is slightly less or somewhat less than the relationship to the existing bungalow, it nevertheless is an acceptable relationship given the configuration of the two homes. On that image, you can pick up the relationship between the existing house, shaded out in red, existing bungalow rather, and the proposed development. So slightly further forward of the frontages onto Good Road and Rosemary Road, not significantly so, and not uncharacteristically so, significant separation to Good Road and reasonable separation to 139 Rosemary Road. In the context of the street scene, again, very much in keeping and in character with the existing character. You can see the side of 67 good road at the edge of the elevation there. Back at the going back to the floor plan, just to highlight the bin and bike store at the rear of the site, which is here, and the refuse store in the ground bins proposed, which are wholly in keeping with guidance on the frontage of the site. Chairman, the recommendation is to grant outline planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. We have Mr. Ames speaking in objection to the application. You have 5 minutes.
5 minutes, yeah. Thank you, Chairman and members, for letting me speak. First of all, the residents do think that it is completely out of character, and I'll go on a great extent to say why. As I said, the adjoining properties are one-storey bungalows, and I live at 67 Good Road, and a point was made in the planning application that no lounge is overlooked, but we have a large window which you saw, and now we do look directly into our lounge, and that is a severe loss of privacy. You notice the distance between 139 Rosemary Road and the new premises are going to block out all their light. I know for a fact that she has a bedroom and a lounge on that side of the building. It's going to be really close. I don't know whether those bedroom windows, which the council stated would be obscured or not, but if they're not obscured, they can look directly into her lounge. Another concern about privacy is 65 Good Road. Mr. Phillips, they spend a lot of time in their sun lounge, which residents will be able to look into. They're elderly and they are very concerned about that. So those are my two first points: invasion of privacy and lack of light. I will suffer from lack of light as well, coming into our lounge window. But one point everybody's overlooked, and to get a new driveway and a new exit of 8 cars going in and out of their building next to a roundabout junction, and that's going to be asking for trouble. The reason is you get visitors parking on the road. I live in a block of flats, so I know what visitors parking is like. You're going to get visitors parked right up to the exit of the new building. So cars parked right up to the exit of the new building, cars parked opposite. You're going to be turning out into between parked cars on the other side, people coming off the junction. Okay, one person coming out may stop in time, they do speed round there, but a third car coming round that roundabout, somebody's trying to get out, somebody stopped because somebody's trying to get out, a third car could easily smash into that car. You say it's not going to happen, but there's an increased and substantial risk of accidents due to the proximity of that exit to a busy roundabout junction. 20 years ago I had an accident there, and I've had three people over the years have smashed into our garden wall. People don't take any notice of the traffic, they just bomb down there. So that's one main concern, increased substantial risk of accidents. Plus, nobody's mentioned the fact there are 2 nearby schools, the Old Camp Wells School and a civilian school just off Brixie Road. You get loads of school children walking up and down that road. I know what they're like, I've seen them fighting and playing. Picture the scene, parked cars, young child runs out between the parked cars, and the driver's coming that roundabout looking, straight on. They're going to notice children running out between parked cars. They're not, and I've seen them fighting as well. Children have to be pushed out into the street. It's okay now, there's no parked cars there. You say that it won't happen, but there could be an increased and substantial risk of damage to people walking there and accidents as well. I think it's very dangerous. Everybody bangs on about health and safety, but that is an accident black spot. That exit comes to a busy junction, it's going to cause problems. And it is, and I know, and finally, I've mentioned, and I know I haven't spoken for too long, but I think I've made my salient points. I've mentioned a compromise which nobody seems to have a thought about. Why? I know the council are under pressure to build homes, the developer wants to make money. We do understand that. But why don't they just build two one-bedroom story bungalows? All the boxes are ticks. The council have ticked their box to build some more homes. Developers made some money. And you're not going to get these issues about invasions of privacy, lack of light, and increased substantial risk of accidents. From that exit, 8 cars going in and out towards a busy roundabout. You're asking for trouble, and I think you're going to get increased risk of accidents, loss of life. You say it can't happen, but there's an increased risk that it could. That's it. I've made my points. Do I go walk away now?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we have Mr. Carr, who's the applicant. No, councillor comes after. If you're more comfortable, that would be fine.
I haven't actually got an awful lot to say, unusually, about this. Would you mind putting a photograph of the road, though? I hear and take on board what the objector had to say, but you can't help but notice in both those photographs that were obviously taken quite recently that there are no cars actually moving. And I have various pictures here that I've taken from Google, none of which have got moving cars in them. So obviously the roads aren't quite as busy as perhaps he suggested to you. The only other real point that I would like to make to you, which isn't really a planning point, but is a poignant point in the environment we live in today, is that these new homes will be heated with air source heat pumps. They will not have guest central heating. They'll obviously be substantially more efficient than the bungalow that's there today. And as Doug has said to you, this has an officer's recommendation for grant, and I hope that you see fit to give us a grant for this property today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. And we have Councillor Earl.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. As you heard from the residents' representative, there are a number of issues with this planning application that many residents have contacted me about. And after considering the plans, I believe there are grounds to refuse this application based on the harm that it would cause residents in the local area. My main objection is the sheer size and scale of this proposal. In the local plan PP281A on flatter developments, it ensures that the scale and massing of the building is in keeping with the neighbouring buildings, but more generally in PP271A it states the development will be permitted provided that it enhances local patterns of development and neighbouring buildings. This proposal is not in keeping and it does not enhance. In fact, it directly violates 3 of the PP271A's terms: height and scale, bulk and massing including the roof, and visual impacts. This is because the proposed site is on a crossroads where all other corner properties are bungalows. The properties immediately next to the development, 67 Good Road and 139 Rosemary Road, are also bungalows. This proposal of 4 two-bedroom flats would not only dwarf the surrounding bungalows, but would be completely out of character, considering that the surrounding plots are single-storey and for single-family occupancy and not blocks of flats or even two-storey houses. Because of this, I would describe the proposed building as overbearing and oppressive, which PP 271C does not permit. The paragraph also states development will be permitted provided it would not result in the harmful impacts upon amenity for local residents, considering levels of light and daylight. At the moment, there's a bungalow on the plot, but the proposed main building will be 8.75 metres high. This means that 139 Rosemary Road, which is the property to the east side, will have afternoon and evening sunlight blocked throughout the year. And despite the distance of the building from 67 Good Road, it will still block light to the house and garden in the winter months. This will have an harmful impact on the amenity for the surrounding residents who have chosen their properties based on the light they are afforded living next to a property of a similar size to their own. That's the main building, but the proposed 4.2 metre high bike shed, which will be on the corner of the plot close to the boundaries of 67 Good Road and 139 Rosemary Road, will cause even more overshadowing as it sits next to both properties' gardens. Residents have raised concerns with me about the material loss of privacy and overlooking if the two-storey building is built on this plot in line with PP 271C. The officer's report says that there will be a 14-metre gap between 67 Good Road and the proposed building. This could result in a loss of privacy as number 67 has a living room window that faces the proposed development. Likewise, both the gardens of 67 Good Road and 139 Rosemary Road could be overlooked, but the tall bike shed will provide some privacy in exchange for light. This proposed block of flats includes 7 parking spaces for future residents, 5 of which are located on the boundary of 67 Good Road and 2 along the boundary of 139 Rosemary Road. This will bring extra noise and vibration and emissions to these property, as what is currently a garden at 137 Rosemary Road will become a car park. The proximity means that residents of the neighbouring properties will have to deal with disturbances of cars coming and going and turning. The extra traffic, both exiting and entering from Good Road to the proposed site, must also be considered against PP 341D and E, which states the council will manage growth and improve accessibility for all by improving safety and managing road space. The ward has ongoing issues with limited on-street parking and an undesirable culture of on-curb parking, and access to the site is close to a mini roundabout, which is known for being a particularly dangerous junction. Even more concerning is the fact that we have 3 schools in the area which children walk to and from. The increased number of vehicles and the access as it is proposed raises the risk of adversely affecting highway safety and convenience to pedestrians if the residents choose to park on the road, as this is another hazard that pedestrians will have to navigate and consider when crossing the junction. One more sentence. Based on the overshadowing and privacy issues that will impact neighbours and increase risk of highway safety, I believe this application should be rejected, but I'm particularly against the height and the scale of the proposed main building, as it does not belong in among bungalows. It should be refused on this alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, anybody want to start the debate on this item? Councillor Le Poivre.
I declare an interest as a ward councillor for this ward, and as you can imagine, I've also been contacted by residents, and I share many of their concerns that have been very well delineated by my ward colleague, Councillor Earl. The particular concern for me is the scale and mass of the building. There are very few 2-storey buildings in the immediate vicinity. The one across the other side of Good Road is a bungalow. It's only further down that you get to the 2-storey ones. Likewise, the other way on Rosemary Road. Rosemary Road is a busy road, so is Good Road. The photo that managed to capture no moving vehicles is quite unusual. They're both, all that area is 20 miles per hour speed limit because of the traffic issues. But particularly it's the scale, it's the massing, the danger of overlooking and loss of light, and I think that there are valid concerns.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. I had a look at this, although it's one of those bits that you think you kind of know, but you have to check out. And the thing that really stood out, and I very much take the ward councillor's thoughts on this, is that it's predominantly bungalow. The pictures might indicate the odd kind of house, but the overall feeling of it is that it's an expansive bungalow. So a block of flats, albeit that it's only slightly bigger than a 2-storey house, is kind of out of keeping with it. Looking at Good Road as a whole, the one thing which stood out looking at it is how the one block of flats there is in Good Road sticks out like a sore thumb as being out of keeping and out of character with the rest of that road. Also, mention has been made of parking. I'm not really sort of that knowledgeable of Rosemary Road, apart from the fact I do drive down it and so on, and it is one of those roads that has had to have its speed kind of kept down because of the dangers. But Good Road itself, I'm an occasional customer of the nearby co-op. Sometimes you have to park down that road, and that road is quite heavily parked on a weekend, and so there is, I think, an issue of adding to the parking in the area and creating a hazard. And I know that it's one of these marginal sort of issues, that how much does a few extra cars make. But my biggest objection to it personally is that the scale and bulk of the building is out of keeping with the rest of that road. It doesn't fit into the neighbourhood, and for that reason I would be concerned about it going ahead.
Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, I've also visited this site on 2 occasions. I went back because I did have sort of mixed feelings about it. On Rosemary Road, immediately opposite this site, all the houses are 2-storey houses. And there can be no doubt about that, they exist. And then the rest of the road, particularly on the side that we're talking about, is interspersed with the odd and occasional 2-storey house. The dilemma I had and why I went back is the bungalows on the corner surrounding both sides of this development are all single-storey. And when I look at that, although there are 2-storey developments in the area, when I look at the immediate vicinity, I do have some sympathy with what's been said about the mass and bulk of the building. And I do feel that either side will be significantly overlooked if this development to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stripley.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the arguments that have been put forward. I can't necessarily agree with the issue of additional parking on the road that this application would cause, because remarkably it's got about twice the parking space that the SPD would require, so there will be more than adequate parking on site for the residents and hopefully for their visitors. I think there are 7 or 8 parking spaces for 4 flats, plus a cycle store. When I visited the roads, both Rosemary and Good Road were quiet. There were no vehicles parked in the vicinity. On this side of the road, both Good Road and Rosemary Road, the bungalows are interspersed, as has been said, with 2-storey houses. On the opposite side, it's almost all 2-storey. As one of the councillors said, the proposal is only slightly bigger than a 2-storey house. And the plot is actually quite significantly large. So I personally think this would fit in. I do understand the concerns about people saying, well, the height of it is so many metres. But that is the height of a ridge with a sloping roof. Quite frankly, most of the year the sun is well over any ridge height. So you will not get significant shading of the neighbouring property or properties, and certainly no shading of their gardens by that. The adjacent bungalow at 139 is built right close to the fence line, and so its lower windows on the ground floor on that elevation in effect are already well shaded by the fencing. The one point I've looked for in the conditions and couldn't find is the boundary treatment. If you look at, if we can go back to the road frontage from Rosemary Road's visual of the existing one.
Sorry, Councillor, the photographs or the...
The photographs. The Rosemary Road frontage. No, the top one. The top one. Actually, the Rosemary Road frontage and going round the corner into Good Road has an extremely nice low brick wall, much better than any of the others in the area. If that is to be retained on the Rosemary Road frontage, then I would like it to be matched further into Good Road up to the proposed new entrance, because the brick wall turns the corner, and when it gets level with the front of the bungalow, it stops, and then you've got a rather horrible and leaning rendered probably block wall or something. So if it were to go ahead, and if the current frontage is to be retained, then I would like that boundary treatment to match up to the entrance. because I think that would vastly improve the good road frontage. I take the point about traffic. Rosemary Road used to be a terrible rat run through, and local teenagers getting their first vehicles used to nip down there and cause all sorts of problems, end up in people's walls and hedges, etc. Therefore, Good Road was made 20 miles an hour, and more recently, all the junctions had a mini roundabout put on them. And because of that, every road coming in having the same priority, that rat running through really has stopped, and I don't believe there have been any serious recent incidents along there. But in the old days, yes, it was a problem. But first of all, it was made 20 miles an hour, and then more latterly, the mini roundabouts were put in at every junction. So I don't see that 4 flats there are going to considerably add to the traffic in the area. So I couldn't see that as a reason for refusal.
Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Apologies.
I think. Sorry. Yes, sorry. So I think Councillor Earl put a very comprehensive and factual deputation on this. And I have to say, I agree with virtually all of the issues that she's raised, although I'm not convinced about the road safety aspects, I have to say. But I take particular note of the loss of privacy to the rear of number 6. It's not just the overlooking into the window, it's actually the overlooking effect into the rear garden of number 6 Good Road. For the other adjacent property, which I think is it 135, I think this development would create an overbearing effect. It would give some degree of overshadowing. And I think the size and bulk of this development would create an overbearing effect on the adjacent property. So I don't think the development would enhance the character of the area. And like Councillor Neil, who was sort of balanced about the overall effect on the character of the development, I was of the same mind. Well, there are some 1 stories and there's some 2-story properties, but when you actually look, when you actually go there and you see the number of bungalows, they're predominantly is bungalows. And whilst if you take the very cleverly drawn up street scene that's in the application, it shows the view of the street scene across the crossing, which actually shows the 2 semi-detached 4-bedroom houses on the opposite side of the road. But if you take to the right-hand side, assuming that this development site is on the left-hand side of the street scene, and then move along, you actually see a row of bungalows. And it's not until you get about 4 bungalows long you get to another double-storey house. So, the street scene thing is an issue. Predominantly there are bungalows in the area, and I accept that in certain circumstances the 2-storey development would be fine. But I think on that corner actually would look a bit odd, in particular because of the size and scale of it. So for those reasons, I can't support the application, and I would move to reject this application on those grounds.
Before I ask for a second, Councillor Miller, did you want to? Yes, of course. Mr. Evans, you want to come in?
Chairman, I'm hearing a range of views, and clearly it's not for me to address those. But I would like to just come back on the parking and highway safety, because that is, I feel like, a little bit more robust of an issue. Councillor Mr Stribley alluded to the level of car parking. Initially, the scheme, as it was originally submitted, was for 8 units, 2 2-bed, 6 1-bed, during the life of the app, and that was to have had 8 parking spaces, which would have met the standard for non-allocated parking. During the life of the application, it's become 4 2-bed. Your SPD would require 6 parking spaces allocated parking to meet that requirement. There's actually 7 on the scheme, so there would not be any shortfall of car parking associated with the scheme. The absence of moving vehicles in the photographs, since I took the photographs, it's in the nature of these things, you wait till any cars have got out of the way before you take the picture, so I would not read anything whatsoever into whether there is or is not a moving vehicle in those photographs. It is within a 20-mile-an-hour zone, it is close to a roundabout, and Transportation Services have highlighted that there is an existing access at that position. Let me just, oops. There's an existing access to 137 Rosemary Road, which does not provide sight lines because of the adjacent boundary treatment, which does not provide turning within the site. So there is, albeit only 1 vehicle or 2 vehicles moving across the footway. The proposals before you would incorporate pedestrian sight lines. They would incorporate a width of access that would be sufficient for 2 vehicles to simultaneously leave and enter the site, so there would be no conflict with vehicles leaving and entering. And therefore, notwithstanding that it is a well-used at certain times of the day pedestrian route because of nearby schools, and is a road of medium traffic, I suggest. It's not especially busy for that kind of road, but nor is it empty of vehicles, as my photographs perhaps suggest. I would suggest that whatever other considerations you bring to the table when you consider this, that highway safety is something you should perhaps set aside as being well dealt with by the scheme before you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I sort of echo what Councillor Mellor was saying about this. The MPPF clearly states that we have to provide sustainable and a different type of accommodation. We can't just have rows of bungalows anymore. We don't have the room for it, as nice as it may be. I think from the highway safety's point of view, there is a mini roundabout there, so that should go a long way to actually slowing any rat-run traffic that's going through there. So, unfortunately, I will not be able to support the call for refusal on this one.
Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. There was a question I was going to ask the officer, which I forgot to ask, if you don't mind. The minimum national standards, space standards, do these flats accord to the national space standards?
Oops, sorry. Sorry. Acknowledge Councillor Stribley. I don't have the numbers in front of me because clearly those standards do not form part of the requirements within the pool local plan, but I have no reason to doubt that they meet those standards. They are quite extensive as 2-bedroom flats.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table to refuse the application. Okay, Councillor Trent.
Yeah, I just really wanted to ask, because I didn't get all of the reasons, but did it include the effect of the parking on the immediately adjacent to the boundary of 67 Good Road? Because I find that another objection to it. I think what was outlined by Councillor Bartlett was okay, but that was the one thing that needs to be added to it, I think.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion on the table to refuse the application. Sorry, Councillor McCormack.
Could I request that it's a recorded vote?
You can request that your vote is recorded. Okay, so So we have a motion on the table to refuse the application proposed by Councillor Bartlett, seconded by Councillor Lepoverdine. All those in favour of that motion, please show.
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Any abstentions? So that motion falls.
Got substantial.
So, any proposals for Councillor Kelsey?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I will move to grant the officer's recommendation.
I'm happy to say.
Chairman, before we move to the vote, in light of things heard during discussion, as part of the recommendation that the officers would like to put before you, we'd like to add a further condition of securing details of boundary treatment, and we can have regard to the discussion that's occurred in the meeting in discharging that condition. So, as set out in the report, but with a further condition to specifically require submission of details for approval of boundary treatment.
Chairman, we do have the applicant in the room. Would you be agreeable to that?
Yes, we will.
So we have a motion on the table to approve the application. All those proposed by Councillor Kelsey, seconded by Councillor Stribley. All those in favour of that motion, please show.
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And those abstaining.
That's 1.
So that motion passes and the application is granted. So that concludes the planning application agenda for today. Can I ask members to stay back for a moment or two after the meeting? Thank you.